One of the best parts about the world of Narnia is that just when you think you've uncovered every secret, every hidden meaning, every real-world connection, you discover something lying just beneath the surface, just waiting to be uncovered. That's what happened to me as I was studying the 7 Ages of Narnia in the last episode. And in today's episode, I'm going to show you how I discovered that for every age in Narnian history, there's a real-world event that corresponds to our world's history. It's going to be a fascinating journey, and there's no time to waste. So let's get started. It's time to leave the Shadowlands behind and step into a world that's more real than our own. It's time to follow me into the wardrobe. Now, dedicated fans of Narnia know that almost everything was written in Narnia for a specific reason. Whether it's the names of characters, locations, the personality traits of heroes, the powers and abilities of villains, or even the specific weapons possessed by certain characters, C.S. Lewis often drew upon myths, symbols, or stories from our world to inspire his writing. And sometimes, when you're reading Narnia, you come across something and your radar just goes off. You just know that this particular passage has a deeper foundation than what's simply printed on the page. And that's how I felt when I began studying the 7 Ages of Narnia's history. Now, first of all, the number 7 should always send up a flag. You see, C.S. Lewis was a theologian and a medieval scholar, and he understood the importance of the number 7 in biblical and medieval numerology. In the Bible, it represented the number of perfection or completion. In medieval times, it was considered the number of balance. There were 7 sins, the 7 sacraments, the 7 planets, the 7 virtues, and the list goes on and on. Now, it's been said that Lewis had more of a medieval view of the world than a modern one. And in the medieval world, numerology connected the mind of men with the mind of God, and creating order through numbers drew men closer to the divine. So it's no surprise that the number 7 is an important number in the Narniad. There are 7 books in the series, there are 7 friends of Narnia, there are 7 lost lords, the 7 isles, Jadis was even 7 feet tall. I could go on, but suffice it to say, when C.S. Lewis used the number 7, it usually indicated some deeper significance or some connection to our world. Now, interestingly enough, there are exactly 2,555 years from the beginning of Narnia to its final day. As one user pointed out, the number of days in a year, 365, times the number of perfection, 7, equals 2,555. Could it be a coincidence? Or was it a clue that every day of every year, every age of Narnia's history was perfectly numbered by C.S. Lewis himself? So why exactly did Lewis choose to break up the Narnian history into 7 ages? What was the significance of the meaning behind these plot points? Was there a meta-narrative that connected to our world? To find out, I started out doing what any reasonable historical literary scholar would do. I Googled it. Because Lewis was so heavily influenced by the medieval mindset in his writings, I started with a search of medieval history to see if there were any mentions of the term 7 ages in there. And almost immediately, I got a lead. I discovered that during the Middle Ages, one of the widely held beliefs about world history was known as Septem Aetatis Mundi, or translated in English, the 7 ages of the world, an idea that was sketched out way back in the 5th century by St. Augustine. According to this theory, the world was divided into 7 ages according to important events in the Bible as follows: the creation of man to the time of Noah, Noah to Abraham, Abraham to David, David to the Babylonian captivity to the coming of Christ, and the coming of Christ to today. The 7th age is an age that begins with the end, the last days of the world, death, judgment, and eternity. Now, just quickly looking at this, it was pretty obvious that Augustine's timeline didn't exactly match up with Narnia's timeline, but it did give me an idea. What if the Narnian timeline was actually based on some sort of outline of our world? C.S. Lewis was clear that he had written Narnia as a supposal. He asked himself, supposing Christ of the New Testament had created another world, what would it look like? Is it really too much to assume that the history of that world would unfold in a way very similar to the events of our world? Now, with just a quick glance, it's easy to see there are some Narnian ages that seem to bear a strong resemblance to the ages in our world. The most obvious connection is the first age, which contains the creation account. In the Bible and in Narnia, both stories involve a perfect world created out of nothing and corrupted when evil enters the world. There's a first man and a first woman who are given dominion over the land and told to multiply. There's even a garden and a forbidden fruit in both stories. So the first age really does seem to be sort of a match. Now, just like the beginning of the world seems to be an easy connection, the end of the world is just as obvious. They both literally happen at the end of the world, culminating in falling stars, a return of the king, war, death, judgment, and a glimpse into a new eternal world that's more real than the current one. Again, it's pretty easy to see a connection here. So at first blush, it seems like I'd found the edges of this puzzle pretty easily. But how about fitting the pieces in the middle? The next obvious age to match was the Golden Age, which parallels the early New Testament with the coming of Christ and the reign of the early church. In both stories, the King of Kings comes to free his people from the oppressive curse that's enslaved them. In both stories, the king offers himself as a substitutionary sacrifice. And in both stories, he's ultimately resurrected. And finally, in both stories, the king entrusts the rule of his kingdom to his followers. So, another clear and obvious match. Now, there's one more age here where the illusion may be less obvious to some, but it's fairly well understood to many Narnia fans. That's the age of the long winter. It's a time when Aslan's people were oppressed by a great darkness under the tyrannical rule of the false queen. It was a time when there was a great longing for the King Aslan to come and rescue them, and there was a deep hope that the Golden Age prophecies would be fulfilled, and the sons of Adam and daughters of Eve would come and signal an end to the queen's tyrannical reign. Now, this age is strongly reminiscent of the time of Advent in the Christian tradition. Many connect this Advent to a time known as the Inter-Testamental Period, literally the 400 years that took place between the Old and New Testament. It's described as the 400 years of silence, when the people of God found themselves under forceful occupation by tyrannical rulers, and the faithful remnant held out hope that the prophecies of men like Isaiah would be fulfilled, that the chosen one would come and rescue the people from the tyrannical rule. Yes, I'd say the long winter is a picture of this age of Advent, another match. But then I hit a roadblock. Augustine's ages basically jump from the early New Testament right to the end of the world. So what would Narnia's 4th, 5th, and 6th ages represent? Well, let's go back to Google. I checked out several possibilities. As suggested by one viewer, I looked at something known as the theological concept of the 7 dispensations of the church. But if the Golden Age was a reference point, this timeline didn't really add up. I also looked at the major ages of human civilization, but again, there wasn't really much connection to be made there. However, it gave me an idea. You see, up until this point, I've been looking through the lens of historians and theologians, but C.S. Lewis was a combination of the two. What if the timeline was a specific timeline? One that was created specifically for Lewis by Lewis himself? And that's when the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. After some deep research, meaning lots of Google searching, I came across a copy of the first lecture C.S. Lewis ever gave after receiving the chair of medieval and Renaissance literature at Cambridge University in 1954. The lecture was entitled De Descriptione Temporum, which means the description of ages. Now, in this lecture, Lewis actually examines the way in which we delineate the 4 major areas of Western history: the Antiquity, the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, and the Renaissance. And that's when it hit me. Could it be that Lewis had modeled part of Narnian history on these eras? Of course, the Age of Antiquity would have fallen into the New Testament era of the Golden Age. And after that, what comes next but the Dark Age? I mean, talk about on the nose. I'd definitely call that a match. Now, what comes next are the Middle Ages, which, if our theory is correct, should align with the Telmarine Age. Now, there's a lot of history covered during this time, but one event in particular stands out to our discussion: the Norman conquest of England. Now, the conquest happened in 1066 when William the Conqueror, a Norman invader, seized control of England by defeating and killing the English king Harold II. When William the Conqueror took the throne, he brought an end to the Anglo-Saxon rule of England, which had lasted for over 500 years. When the Normans took over England, The Anglo-Saxons fled the country in droves, taking refuge in the rugged lands of Scotland and Ireland, where they were able to hide from the strong and brutal rule of this new king. Of course, so much of this resonates perfectly with the age of the Telmarine conquest, when Murat I invaded Narnia, overtaking the royal lineage, ruling through strength and brutality, and driving most of the true Narnians out of the country and into hiding in the wilderness. Yes, it seemed we have yet another match. Now, what about this last age, the Renaissance? Of course, the era was known as the era of renewal that changed the world, a time when artists and philosophers recovered the ideas and knowledge of antiquity that had been nearly lost during the Middle Ages. And this rediscovery led to new flourishing, even flowing into what would become known as the Age of Exploration, which was a time when brave souls took to the seas like never before, discovering new routes, great riches, and worlds that had previously been unknown. Now, come on, are you kidding me? Could the connection be any more clear? An entire book was written about Narnia's recovery of old knowledge which had been nearly lost, a rebirth of new ideas, and exploration on the high seas, which resulted in countless new worlds being discovered. It's called, of course, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So there's absolutely no doubt, when it comes to the Age of Exploration, we have a definite match. So after all that, I think it's clear. We have cracked the code. We discovered that when it comes to the big story of Narnia, each age, each year, each day was intentionally planned by Narnia's creator, C.S. Lewis. But, we shouldn't really be surprised. For C.S. Lewis, there was no such thing as happenstance, whether it was in the land of talking animals or in our own world. Lewis believed that history was one big, important, ultimate story. And no matter what side of the wardrobe you found yourself on, you'd be sure to see that that big story had always been designed to point to the one that was there in the very beginning, the one that changed history in the middle, and the one that closed up the sky in the end. Every age, every year, every day, in the end, it's really his story. Well, that's all the time we have for today, but I want to hear from you. Tell me what you enjoyed about this episode. Tell me if you learned anything new. Tell me if there's anything you'd like to hear in the next episode. And as always, I look forward to seeing you next time as we take another journey into the wardrobe.